Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We'll go ahead and get started in just a minute here as more folks continue to join. Just wanted to cover a couple of housekeeping items before we join in. First of all, this webinar is going to be recorded. So if there's anyone on your team that wasn't able to make it today or might be interested in viewing, we'll go ahead and follow up with you after the webinar with a recording of this program. Other thing I'll mention is that we're going to have a couple of optional survey questions popping up here. And so these are just helpful for us to gauge a little bit more about pain points that your team might have with remote monitoring. Um, and that's really helpful for us is to learn a little bit more about how we might be able to help. Last thing I'll mention is that for a general itinerary of what we'll be covering today, we're going to start out with some slides that are about Lens and how Lens is different from other platforms that are on the market. Then we're going to jump into a live demo where we'll actually do some site visits with Lens. And then we'll save about 10 minutes or so for Q&A at the end of the webinar. And so if you have any questions throughout the program, please drop those in the Q&A box that you'll see at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And so once you send those to Kate and I, we'll be able to see those. We'll either answer those throughout the program or we'll save them for about that 10-minute period at the end. If we're not able to answer those questions throughout the webinar, we'll be sure to follow up with you directly afterwards with an email. So thanks again for joining me today. We can go ahead and get started. My name is Miles, and I work for a small software company called Upstream Tech. And so today we'll be talking about our remote monitoring tool, which is called Lens. And so Lens is a platform that we built to help a pretty wide range of organizations save time and money on their remote monitoring. And so I actually used to be a Lens customer myself. I used to work for a land trust in Colorado, where I was tasked with driving around my county and around the state to evaluate whether there's any new structures being constructed on private properties where we had conservation easements, and also to tell about the current agricultural use of those various parcels. And so I started using Lens to save myself a lot of time behind the windshield and really streamline the monitoring that I was doing. And so that's how I brought us to the current assessor market. And so some of the challenges that we've heard from assessors from chatting with folks around the country is that it's very similar to the use cases and challenges that we've heard from other types of customers that we have as well. So monitoring on the ground is time consuming and it's often pretty costly, despite kind of being how business has been done for many years. Another downside of field visits is that, as you know, it's pretty difficult to see what you need to see on a private property from a public road. So whether there's also some safety concerns there as well. So for assessors in states like Texas, you don't want to hop a fence that has purple markings on it, and there's always challenges with accessing private property. So I'm sure many of you are familiar or even using some of the different alternatives that are on the market for tax assessors to use aerial imagery. And so oftentimes those programs offer tasked imagery, which means that they're actually flying airplanes over your entire county and capturing really high resolution imagery for you. That imagery is fantastic. The downside is that it often costs hundreds of thousands of dollars and is captured pretty infrequently. So oftentimes only every couple of years makes it pretty difficult to answer more frequent questions that might arise. And otherwise you have to drive out in the field to actually answer those questions on the ground. Another thing that we hear is that typically the imagery is captured around January 1st, which is great for evaluation and valuation standpoint, but is a bit less helpful for evaluating land use trends and agricultural trends throughout the rest of the year, which is kind of best observed during that actual growing season. So a couple ways that Lens is a bit different from other platforms that are on the market. The first is that instead of relying on a single imagery source or capturing imagery ourselves, we are actually aggregating dozens of imagery sources in one place for you to choose from. And so that gives you access to year-round imagery instead of infrequent captures that only come in every couple of years or so. And from those different images, you can order only what you need on a per acre basis. So we have very little to no spatial minimums, and we're not locking you into capturing imagery of your entire county. You can really choose which areas you need imagery in order to answer the questions that you're hoping to answer. And so we're also aggregating public imagery sources to help you minimize your spending on those commercial images. And those public image sources are really great for answering questions year round, like seeing trends in agricultural usage. And that's something that we'll spend quite a bit of time on today. So here's a glimpse into some of the different sources that we offer in Lens. And so these are both commercial and also public sources. So those commercial sources we're offering with very low to no minimum area requirements. So those are sold on a per acre basis to you. And then the public imagery in Lens we make completely freely available. So some of the tools that we cover today is our Analyze tool. And so this tool allows you to access that public imagery and see year-round trends across your properties. So that's really helpful for evaluating agricultural trends and seeing the past couple of years of ag usage or irrigation, et cetera. It's also really helpful for honing in on particular examples like the timing of when a new residence was built, a new driveway, or even something like a shed. We'll also take a look at how Lens is pretty helpful for creating reports that can collate all these observations and make it really easy to have all your records in one place and also have supplemental information in case you're dealing with any contestations or clarifications with landowners. So they can see exactly what imagery you were viewing when you made that decision. So we work with over 250 organizations that are working on a pretty wide variety of monitoring tasks. And so our goal is to create a very flexible platform that saves a pretty wide variety of folks a lot of time. And so in addition to the logos that you're seeing on the screen, we work with everyone from the federal government to down to a county assessor level with conservation districts, et cetera. And we know that conservation districts and assessors, they really vary quite a bit in terms of what their monitoring looks like. So we actually work with a couple of counties in Colorado that actually share a border. And these counties approach everything pretty differently in terms of how they actually handle their field monitoring. So everything from residential permit visits to ag status checkups look pretty different. Our goal with Lens is to make a pretty easy to use platform that makes it really flexible to choose, different ways to monitor these sorts of properties. So our first visit today is going to be a residential permit visit. So this will kind of be a replacement for driving out in the field. We're actually going to navigate to a particular address and really take a look at some of those high resolution commercial images that we bring into Lens that are really helpful for taking a close look at something like a new building. We'll also take a look at an ag status example. So this is, I think a lot of folks on the call are actually here for this particular reason. Every state has different ag status programs or current use monitoring programs. So we have folks on the call from Ohio, Washington, California, et cetera. And I know that these programs can really vary based on your county and based on your state. So here in Ohio, some folks are probably primarily looking at row crops. In Washington, they might be looking at designated forest land or other different types of examples across their county. And so I hope to, capture a pretty good range of use cases today. But if you want to see an example that's a bit closer to home, feel free to reach out to me, miles@upstream.tech. I'd be happy to talk with your team, and we can take a look at some examples that really represent the areas that you're going to be looking at. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into Lens. So Lens is a web app program. So that means that there's no sorts of software that you need to keep updated on your end. And all the imagery that we're going to be looking at today is actually stored in the cloud, which makes it really easy to not take up all your server space like you might be experiencing if you're using any drone imagery. So as I scroll down here, I can see the different portfolios that we have in our account. So portfolios are essentially folders in which we can add our areas of interest. And so our areas of interest might range from individual properties that we might have a permit visit to massive areas of our county that we're hoping to look at for agricultural trends. And so you can arrange your portfolios however you like. Some of our assessor customers will have a single portfolio for all their ag status or current use monitoring, and then a separate portfolio for their individual property visits. You could also have portfolios for each member of your team if you're kind of delegating that monitoring workload across different members. So when I jump into one of those portfolios here, I can see those individual properties that I have in Lens. And these can range from a single acre to 500,000 acres. And it really depends what you're hoping to see in terms of how to add that property into Lens. And you can see here that we also have these custom tags that are really helpful for just keeping track of what you're seeing on all these different properties. So if you need to flag an area for follow-up or potential unpermitted structure, that's really easy to do with Lens. And so adding new areas in Lens just takes a couple of seconds. You can either draw those areas out on the map, you can upload them from a geospatial file. So for those of you that might have For instance, here in Ohio, we have the CAUV program that has all your enrolled properties in Ag Status program. You could upload a single file that contains all of those properties and just upload those into Lens in just a couple of seconds. Or you can actually build properties in Lens by using US tax parcels. And so let's do a little bit of a site visit here instead of actually driving out to a particular property. So I'm just going to add in an address that's going to zip me right to that particular area. Here I can see those various tax parcels in this area, and I can simply click on these parcels here to add this property into Lens. So when I'm all set here, I can just go ahead and click confirm, and then we're automatically going to start processing all of the commercial and public images that have been captured for this area. So that process just takes a couple of minutes. Next thing you know, you're kind of looking at this property right here in Lens. And so by default, we're going to show you the most recent public image that's been captured of this area. And as I scroll down here, I can see quite literally decades of high resolution public images that have been captured of this area over time. So these are really helpful for being able to tell, which buildings were here 10 years ago versus today. And so these public images are really helpful for having that baseline of understanding as to what's been occurring on a property over time. But in this particular example, I really want to look at this particular house here. And so that might be where I want to pull in this parcel data. I can double check our parcel ID number and ownership information. This is countrywide parcel data that we stream in from Regrid. And I really want to take a visit to this particular property today to understand what's been happening with a recent building permit that was issued a couple of years ago. So I want to understand how far along is this residential construction? Where is it at in that process? And so right now we're looking at an image from 2020. And to see this image in 2024 or 2025, that's when I want to use our order pane here to check out all of the commercial images that are available for this area. So here you can see all those different vendors that we have relationships with. And as they're capturing aerial and satellite imagery of this property, those are immediately available for you in Lens. And so I can simply scroll through these different images here, see these different dates, these different types of resolutions. And then when one of these images looks interesting to me, I can go ahead and preview it. So this is going to show me the exact date and even the exact time that this image was captured. So it's a lot different than something like Google Earth, where you might be looking at an image and kind of unsure when exactly that image was really captured. Lens makes it really easy to tell when exactly the image was captured and also how much it's going to cost. So this whole property that we added into Lens is about 90 acres. And this image would cost about 6 cents per acre. So it'd be about $5 for me to order this entire image of this area. And so if I go ahead and click this blue order button right here, that's going to take about 4 or 5 minutes or so for that to load. And then it's going to be ready for viewing in Lens. Now, $5 is pretty good, but honestly, I really only want to see this particular area of the property. I'm really interested in just where this primary residence is. So I might use our order partial area tool to select an even smaller area of this property, which I can then further limit down and actually use this to order an even smaller piece of that image that we were looking at before. And so if I want to see this image with just only that subset, I can see that I've selected only 12 acres. And this would only cost me about 70 cents to get a high resolution recent commercial image for this area. And so I'm going to go ahead and order that image for 72 cents. And we're going to use that for some monitoring. So the best way to generally view true color imagery in Lens is with compare mode. And so compare mode allows us to compare this image from 2020 against that more recent image from 2024 that we just purchased. And so that gives us the ability to use a slider bar right here, which makes it really easy for us to see any sorts of changes across this property. So here I'm seeing a pretty massive addition to this residence here. So I'm seeing this kind of breezeway that was constructed here. Looks like there's a pretty good sized garage that was added. Might be sort of ADU dwelling with those gambrel windows that were put in there. Looks like we also have a in-ground pool that's probably straddled by two of these little porch addition structures here. Some hardscape landscaping. You can tell this existing shed is still in the same spot. Looks like this playground set was actually moved a little bit farther north, and it probably has some sort of sandbox or mulch pad around that now. And it looks like this looks like some sort of trampoline down there. It's actually been moved farther north on this property as well. You're also seeing the removal of quite a few trees and the replacement of those bigger trees with some smaller ornamental ones. And so already I'm seeing quite a bit across this property. And what we've heard from some of our assessor company customers is that this already answers a question for them. So ordering this 70-cent image has already answered a question for them as to whether they need to go out there on the ground to see whether this is still in progress, whether there's a foundation, whether there's a roof, etc. So for less than a buck, we've answered really all of those questions. But now that we've identified that there is indeed a change on this property, it might be a good time to take a closer look. So maybe we want to evaluate the structure a little bit more closely. So right now we're looking at a satellite image, but we could actually go to a 15 centimeter highest resolution image that we have in Lens. And so this imagery is actually captured via aircraft and is even a higher resolution. Now it's a little bit more expensive on a per acre basis, but provides us with even more clarity into what's happening on this area. So here I can see even a John Deere Gator right there. Looks like there's 3 slides on this playground set. Looks like those are actually street lamps that this person installed on their property. You can see the mesh on that trampoline there. But this really gives us enough detail to see quite a bit about this residence here. And so this is where I might want to take a break and actually measure out how large this area is. So I can use our measure tool here to actually select an area. So if I want to go ahead and select this little garage right here, I can get a really nice, quick, and easy way of estimating our square footage. So looks like that's about 2,700 square feet. So I'm just going to go ahead and add this as a note. So I can actually copy that, new residence garage, and I can add this to Lens as a note. And so when I create this note, it's actually saved to our Lens account forever. So over here in this left-hand notes pane is where I can see notes made by myself, by my colleagues, that document the different changes that have been observed around this property. So it's really easy to select those areas using this note tool and then add those in as observations. Now, each of these notes is actually showing you an individual area of the property. When I click on one of these, it would take me to that spot on the property. It would show me the exact images that that person was viewing when they made that note. So that's a really helpful way to just document these sorts of observations. I can go ahead and add tags to these that are providing a little bit of context as to follow-up or other action items that we need to keep track of. Now, with all these notes, I can export these into a report, a PDF report with just a click of a button. So I'll go ahead and click a report right there. And then this gives us the ability to even create a smart summary of all of those different observations that were created in Lens. As I scroll down here, each and every one of those observations will appear as its own page. And you'll see all that information of each of those images. And this is really helpful to, for your own record keeping, as well as to pass along to landowners if there's any sorts of contestations or other issues that you might have regarding, the current status of their property on a current date, which is really easy for you to surface right there with all that metadata in that satellite imagery. So going back to this property here, we've answered a couple of questions so far. We've used a 70-cent image to identify that indeed there was a new construction and to verify that it was completed. We looked at this even higher resolution image to really get a close look at what exactly we're seeing in this area here. The kind of last remaining question that I have is, when exactly was this building made? So when was this addition really started? Sometime since 2020, so sometime between 2020 and 2024. But this is where I'm actually going to use public imagery instead of commercial imagery to answer that question. So in addition to this high resolution true color imagery that we have in Lens, we also have vegetation data that's actually captured by a different satellite. And you might be kind of wondering why that would be helpful for answering that question. But what I'm going to show you is how to actually analyze the footprint of a building here, and then analyze this area for changes in vegetation. And the reason I'm doing that is because before this was turned into an asphalt roof, this was actually a lawn. And so at some point, that lawn was replaced with, the construction equipment, it was graded, etc. And so we can use Lens to actually figure out when exactly that happened, and we can figure that out without purchasing any imagery. So here I can see back to 2016 or so. This is showing me that this was a pretty normal lawn up until probably winter time of, looks like 2020. that's one that really gave out there. And you can tell just from those red values there that pretty much all the vegetation in this footprint was completely replaced. And so this is a tool that we're going to walk through in our next example about agricultural monitoring. But I think is also really neat to showcase how it's also useful for looking at residential changes and figuring out when exactly those changes would have happened. So with that, let's head over to Colorado. So this is a much larger area. So this is about a 4,000 acre chunk of eastern Colorado. I actually used to spend a lot of time driving out these county roads to figure out whether these center pivots were in use or not. And so right now we're looking at a true color image that was captured in summer of 2024. So this is from back in July. And from this kind of glimpse in time here, it's pretty easy for us to kind of get an idea of the ag use that's happening across these various fields. So some of these very clearly are, currently planted, currently irrigated. Some of these other ones, it's a little bit unclear what the recent history has been. And you'll notice right here, here's our location search button. So if I wanted to search for one of these particular parcels or addresses right in here, I can just go ahead and search for that. And many of our assessor customers are adding in much larger areas of their county into Lens to use ag for the ag monitoring aspect, because they're really looking at much larger observations where they might not need that high resolution imagery. So I'm kind of curious, has this particular pivot right here actually been in use for the past couple of years? Has it been fallow? What's the deal with it? And it's a little bit difficult to see in this imagery from July. And even if I drove this road right next to this pivot, it might still be pretty unclear what the recent history of this area was. And so that's again where I'm going to come back to this analysis tool. I'm going to select this pivot, and then we're going to analyze this area for changes in vegetation. And so that gives me the ability to pretty much see a nice little history of what exactly has been happening in this particular area. And so I can see the owner name right there, and I can also see the past couple of years of history here. So when I enlarge this a little bit, this is telling me a story. So back in 2020, I can see that this was indeed put in. This is certainly harvested, certainly irrigated. Looks like it was harvested back probably between, looks like July 2nd and July 12th is when that was harvested. No more activity for the rest of that year. 2022, this was again irrigated, harvested. Looks like 2023 was probably an off year. And in 2024 here, I'm going to zoom in here. And this vertical line right here is the date of this July image that we're looking at right here. So I can actually see that despite this July image making it seem like this field was maybe fallow for the entire year, I can see that this image was just captured a couple weeks after it was actually harvested. And so that's why this tool is so useful for evaluating those season-wide trends, because if I was to drive by this property on the ground, it might look like it wasn't even used that year. Or if I was to rely on a single true color image, it might look like it was completely, not in use for this year. But using our analyze tool, we can actually see that this was harvested, only a couple days prior, which is why it looks like it hasn't been in production this year. So I can go ahead and add these notes into Lens. You'll also notice up here, I can also quantify the acreage here. So if I want to kind of delineate out the number of acres that are in production, it's really easy to get those numbers out of Lens and compare those against the enrollment numbers that you're given by the landowner. Some of you might also be evaluating other conservation practices as part of your, for instance, in the public benefit rating system in Washington State, you might be looking at practices like cover cropping. And so if you wanted to analyze a field for those sorts of trends, I could simply come back here, analyze this different pivot here, and take a pretty close look at the past couple of years. So it looks like in this particular season, there's really no vegetation activity during the main part of the growing season. And it only started to green up in those later months in like November. So that's probably telling me that this field was cover cropped. Here we're seeing a couple of these white values down here at 0. That means that this was covered in snow, which makes sense because that's February. Looks like this was harvested the next year. It was not cover cropped the next year. I'm not seeing any sort of vegetation through that next winter. But as recent as 5 days ago, this is showing signs that this was cover cropped. And so I can click on these individual data points, and that gives me the ability to see this whole area as recent as 5 days ago. And again, this is a completely free image to view in Lens. And so when you're doing really large area monitoring like this and trying to understand those sorts of agricultural trends or the presence of vegetation, Lens makes it really easy to interact with this sort of imagery without having to purchase a bunch of imagery for these areas. And so I can compare this particular point to maybe one that was in peak season of a couple of years ago. And so I can hold down shift there. I can see really at a glimpse the ag usage across all of these different parcels. And I can go ahead and create notes that documenting any sorts of concerns or recurring issues I'm seeing with a lack of agricultural use in those areas. So I think this is a really neat, showcase of how Lens makes it really easy to zoom in close and see individual structures with high-res imagery, but you don't always need that sort of imagery to understand, what's happening in terms of agriculture. And in many cases, like we're seeing here, it's actually better to not have to rely on a single data point and instead, in seconds, be able to understand multiple years of history. And so if you're reviewing recent applicants, for your CAUV program and you need to see the past 3 years of ag usage, Lens makes it really easy to just graph that right out. I can kind of filter down the past couple of years. I can go ahead and add a note that even documents it. So it's really easy to see all that sorts of data in Lens. And as I mentioned earlier, I recognize that ag monitoring looks very different depending where you are in the US. So in Colorado here, it looks like center pivots. But in Washington State, it actually might look more like evaluating designated forest land for forestry activity or conversion into residential structures. And so we have a couple minutes left. So I just wanted to quickly show you how this imagery is also useful for looking at things like forest activity. So here's a couple of true color images looking at this pretty mountainous region in California. And so this is showing us some pretty major forestry activity that's happening across this parcel here. And so this is very visible, in this true color imagery, but it's also visible with that Sentinel-2 public imagery that we were looking at before on those ag parcels. And so this is, again, where if you're in Washington State and you're needing to evaluate whether a timber parcel like this has been converted into housing or whether it's had any major clear cuts in the past couple of years, that's something that you can really easily see using Lens and that public imagery without having to spend any money on high resolution commercial imagery. You could then analyze that area, figure out when exactly that activity happened, and then I can go back here and order a high resolution image to hopefully see some of that actual equipment that was used during the harvest, et cetera. So again, it's really nice to be able to use those sorts of public images first, but then order commercial imagery as needed afterwards. One last thing that I'll mention here, kind of for those of you that might be more interested in that sort of designated forest land use case, is we actually have automatic change detection. So if I wanted to be notified of any sorts of unseasonal change in forest cover across all the enrolled properties in my county, I could enroll in vegetation drops in Lens, and then our system would notify you of any sorts of unseasonal drops in vegetation like we're seeing here. So this is actually using AI to kind of intercept these different sorts of changes that might not be so normal. And so this is another helpful second set of eyes if you're hoping to see any sorts of changes across those conservation properties that your county might be issuing extra credits for. So that brings us to the end of our live demo in Lens, and I wanted to save some time now to walk through any questions that you all might have in terms of what you've seen today. So I think Kate is going to help us out here, and we'll go through a couple different questions that have come in.
Yeah, hey Miles, thanks for going through all that. That was a ton of good information in a row. And hey everyone, I'm Kate. I'm from the Upstream Tech team as well, and we'll help go through some Q&A right now. I want to remind folks that there is a Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen, and if you have any questions for Miles as we're going through more, please feel free to just drop those in there as well. Let's see, Miles, I have a few here. This one is, can imagery from Lens be downloaded into GIS?
Yeah, great question. So let me go back to, let's see, we'll navigate back to one of these other properties here. So as I open up this date drop down here, I'm able to see all those different commercial images that we purchased in Lens, as well as all those different public high resolution images. And so if I wanted to bring one of these into GIS, for use, for other applications like mapping, etc. I can go ahead and go over to our details pane here. I can scroll down and then I can see that I can download full resolution geotiffs. So these are going to be already referenced and ready to go. If you wanted to create a really quick field map with this, you could actually just pop that right into GIS and take that on the field with you. If you have multiple images that you purchase for a property like we have here, you can also stream those all into GIS by using this WMTS link. Really helpful for, having a more recent base map image for your maps instead of some outdated Esri base map that was kind of captured over the past 10 years or so.
Awesome. This one's kind of related, and you covered it at the beginning, but folks are wondering what commercial imagery sources are available, and maybe how you go about choosing which image.
Yeah, good question. So when you add in an area of lens, to lens rather, that's when you can order up that order pane here. And this is where we're going to show you all the captures that have been made for your property. And so you're seeing a pretty wide range of options here. And these are going to vary a little bit around where you are in the state, where you are in the country. But rest assured that as soon as any of these different vendors capture imagery of your area of interest, we make those available to you right in Lens. And so you're seeing everything from 30 centimeter Maxar and Airbus imagery. This is actually the highest resolution imagery that you can purchase as a civilian from a satellite. Then as we scroll down here, you're seeing near map sources as well. And so these near map sources are actually captured via airplane, which means that there's a lot less atmosphere between the camera and the ground. And so those are really high resolution and crisp images. And that 15 centimeter image there is, our highest resolution image that we offer in Lens. So I always encourage folks to think about the type of question that you're hoping to ask. Some of our folks in California that use Lens for tax assessment, all they need to see is whether a structure has been completed or not, and whether they need to make a site visit out to that area. And so that sort of question could be answered with a pretty low resolution image. On the other hand, if you're wanting to take a really close look at what a completed structure looks like, and you're wanting to really, zoom in on the particular areas of that property, that's when you might want to have a higher resolution image. So that's why we have all these different resolutions available for you in Lens, and you can really choose whichever one is working best for the sorts of questions that you have.
Nice. This one is related. This person is curious about how the analytics and forestry data come with the imagery when you say it. So maybe some clarification around our overlays and how that analysis works.
Yeah, great question. So that vegetation data that we took a look at was one of the different index layers that we bring into Lens. And so when I open up this layer drop down here, I'm seeing a couple of different true color sources, which these are what we're looking at right now. It looks like you're looking at an airplane window. And we also have index layers that show you what this property looks like in terms of the vegetation activity across this area. So you can see that, there's obviously no vegetation activity where there's built structure, but there is quite a bit in the woods here. These are only some of the data sets that we offer in Lens. And so if you'd like to see all the different public and free images that you have access to in Lens, you can navigate to our Lens library, where you can see everything from our highest resolution sources down to forest data, to fire data, and even water quality indicators. So we work with a pretty wide variety of organizations to help them save their time and money on remote monitoring, but they have a lot of different questions that they're asking. And so some of these are relevant for tax assessors, and especially for some of you that are, have current use programs or are evaluating conservation practices. But you can also keep this very minimal so that when you're in Lens, you only have a couple of the most relevant sources that are usable for you.
Nice. We have a question here, kind of fun around drone imagery. Their county gets drone imagery, and can that be viewed inside of Lens?
Yeah, good question. Yeah, so some of the challenges we've heard with counties that do have drone programs is that once they have that drone imagery, it's kind of they have a limited basis of comparison. Being able to have compare mode and move a sidebar back and forth makes it a lot easier to see any changes across an area. So as part of our enterprise plan, we can ingest drone imagery if it's in the correct format and georeferenced. That's really great imagery to bring into Lens because it's so high resolution. And with that imagery, you can again compare it against a whole bunch of public images that are dating back decades. So it's really nice to have quite a bit of comparison to see any of those changes over time.
Nice. Okay, we have an ag question here. Someone's wondering if we're able to determine what type of crop is planted.
Yeah, good question. It depends. So I think we always tell folks that it's really helpful to have some on the ground, basis of comparison. So um, we work with folks that spend a lot of time on the ground and they have a general idea of the types of crops that are on different parcels. And then when they use Lens, they're able to build, a pattern of recognition there in terms of being able to see exactly what is being grown in that area. But I think it does really require some on the ground context. Um, there's, different signatures that you might be able to recognize in terms of growing season, how deep of a green value that vegetation tends to have during its growing season, when they typically are harvested, et cetera. We also have, I don't have any imagery pulled up right now, but we also have near infrared imagery, which relies on different color bands. And sometimes different types of vegetation actually reflect light differently than others. So some of our customers have been able to compare those images against what they know is on the ground and be able to determine patterns in terms of what different types of crops look like under that near infrared imagery. So it's definitely something that I think paired with some on the ground expertise and the imagery and lens, that's something that you can probably figure out.
Very cool. Another question here. Can you guarantee imagery at a certain time of year?
Yeah, good question. So this order pane and lens that I showed you before, this is showing you all the captures that have been paid for by people that paid these satellite companies directly for these images. So that means that somebody originally tasked this image, and usually it's an insurance company, it might be the government, et cetera. And so when that company paid for that image to be captured, we make that available to you in Lens that you can purchase on a per acre basis. And so that's how you're able to get this imagery so affordably. Now, if you need an image that is captured, for instance, really close to the first of the year, kind of like this Maxar image right here, and you're not finding any availability, we can actually do that process of tasking imagery for you right from Lens. So if you want to select all the properties that you need imagery for, you can then estimate the cost of us facilitating a satellite to actually capture a custom image for you. Now, keep in mind that's a bit more expensive than ordering imagery on a per acre basis through Lens, but it's a really great way to just guarantee that you're going to have coverage at a certain point. Or if you really need to get a image of a particular property that's in a really hard to reach area on a certain date, that's another way that you can guarantee imagery coverage of that particular area.
Nice. This one, I think I understand correctly. They're curious if you can build like a panoramic view.
Yeah, so they might be referring to like oblique imagery. So the ability to see kind of an angular view. And that's something that some of the other platforms on the market do offer when they capture their own imagery. That's not something that we currently offer in Lens right now. So we offer essentially top-down imagery, which for most of our assessor customers is enough to answer the questions that they're after. Um, but in terms of being able to see the side of a house, that's not something that we can currently really do. Although you can see quite a bit of context from shadows and other ways of kind of looking at a structure with this really high resolution imagery like we're seeing here from near map. So although we're not able to see the side of the structure, we're able to kind of gauge the height, the general footprint and other context just based on the shadow cues that we're seeing here.
Great. And this one, also a detailed imagery one. Can you see livestock on these images?
Yeah, that's a good question. We actually have quite a few customers who use Lens for monitoring livestock encroachment, and the answer is yes. So there's a pretty wide variety of images that you can see livestock with. I think we've seen livestock using our 1 meter resolution imagery, which is the most affordable imagery you can get in Lens, and certainly you could see it very clearly with this imagery that we're looking at right now, which is only 15 centimeter resolution. So that's indeed something that many folks use Lens for is actually counting cows and being able to evaluate whether a field's being grazed or not.
Nice. I like this one. This one comes up quite a bit. This is once a jurisdiction has paid for an image, can they access it again at a later date for an appeal? So folks using this in like a legal context.
Yeah, definitely. So that's one of the best parts of using Lens is when I open up this date drop down here, I'm able to see all these commercial images I've purchased over the years, as well as all those public images. So you have this really nice living archive of quite literally hundreds of images that you can choose from. And as long as you have an active Lens account, we'll save not only all these images for you, but all the notes that you've made as well. So it makes it really easy to export those reports, that document um, when exactly something happened. And if it's something that you missed, keep in mind that Lens makes it really easy to go back in time. So if there's a contestation that you're dealing with, but it'd be really helpful to have an image from, May of 2023, that's when you can simply come back to one of these images here and retroactively purchase that image and, have that information now. So I think Lens is really helpful for that sort of scenario where you might have to go back in time a little bit in addition to seeing it today.
All right, we have a few questions about cost and how to get started. I want to make sure we get to maybe this is a good moment to kind of inform folks about our plans and how you might sign up to get started if you wanted to try it.
Yeah, definitely. So our pricing is pretty transparent. It's on our website, which is upstream.tech. So you'll see that we actually have two different products. This one that we're talking about today is called Lens. And so if you navigate to Lens here, you can see our different plans right here. And so most of our assessor customers are using Lens Standard and Lens Enterprise. And so I guess the difference between these two is that Lens Standard is our kind of off-the-shelf offering. And so this is going to include that parcel data, the change detection, et cetera. And it's really best for folks that are able to kind of pull a credit card out and sign up right on the website. They don't need any sorts of custom billing or custom integrations, et cetera. And so that starts at that would be about 7,200 a year. Lens Enterprise is helpful for folks that need custom billing, integrations with other platforms for porting notes into or imagery into your other systems, custom trainings for your whole team, etc. Something I'll mention that's standard across the board with any Lens plan is that we offer free and really great customer support. So we're always really excited to talk with you all. A lot of our team has actually spent quite a bit of time in the field, and so we kind of understand the challenges of field monitoring and the questions you might be going after. One thing that I'll actually mention about price right now is that as a thank you for you all for joining this webinar today, we are offering a $500 imagery credit that can be applied for anyone that's able to sign up for a Lens annual plan, Lens Standard or Lens Enterprise this month. So if you're able to sign up for Lens this month, we will have you covered for the first $500 of commercial imagery that you want to purchase through Lens. So that could cover up to 12,000 acres of your county with imagery, depending on the resolution that you want. And keep in mind that all of that public imagery that you have in Lens, that's completely free to view, and there's no per acre charge for that imagery. One other thing that I'll mention in terms of offerings is we've talked with several counties that are kind of a one-man band sort of assessor operation where they don't necessarily have the staff capacity to actually do their own ag status or current use monitoring. And so we do offer remote monitoring services. So if you wanted to send us, for instance, a list of all the parcels in your county that have that are enrolled in your ag tax program, we could do an annual review of all those to spot any sorts of changes over time and send those to you. So that's kind of a separate conversation that I'd be happy to have. And you can always reach out to me, Miles at upstream.tech for that.
So a couple, and I dropped our website there in the chat as well. I'll also make sure to drop your email here too. Seen it a couple of times, but Miles is really the best resource. If you have any questions after this webinar, or if we don't get to one of your questions, that's going to be the best person to follow up with. A couple quick clarifications about cost here, and you might have covered this, but one of these was, is billing handled immediately for those imagery orders, or is it sent in that monthly invoice?
Yeah, great question. So our default billing is that we don't bill you immediately for an image you purchase. We'll just essentially add up all your monthly purchases and then charge you at the end of that month for your billing method that's on file. So you're not seeing a bunch of noise. It makes it really easy to keep track of your purchases over time. We'll send you a full breakdown of, and also you can see this in Lens, a full breakdown of all the images that you purchased, which is really helpful for a expense reimbursement standpoint. Also, you can have different billing reports for different portfolios. So if you're actually kind of expensing your agricultural program monitoring differently than your general building permit review. Those are things that you could actually separate out into different invoices as well. And then in terms of custom billing, that's something that we do offer to our enterprise customers. And so we could follow a different cadence that works better for your office with an enterprise plan.
Perfect. We're getting close to the end here. This final one and related is, do we have a mechanism to cap the cost?
Yeah, great question. We can certainly set a not to exceed on your account. And so you can make sure that you're not accidentally going over that amount. I'll also mention that when you invite folks to join your account, you can set their permission levels so that they can either purchase imagery whenever they want, or they're limited in their ability to purchase imagery. So if you'd rather have, folks on your team only be able to interact with imagery and complete the notes and reporting, but not necessarily purchase imagery themselves, that's something that you can do right in Lens with our permission levels.
Perfect. And I know we're right at the end here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Like I said, we have recorded this and we'll send that out to everyone that registered, so you'll have that and can pass it on to team members as well. Miles, any final thoughts you want folks to know about?
No, I really appreciate you all for coming today. And again, please feel free to reach out to me, Miles at Upstream.tech. I'd be always happy to show you some examples that are closer to your neck of the woods in case your use case is a little bit different than the ones we went over today. But really appreciate your time and thanks. We'll follow up with a recording afterwards.